My name is Ethan Hayes, and I used to be a reasonable man. I worked as a civil engineer, a job that demanded logic, precision, and a firm belief in the predictable laws of physics. My world was one of concrete and steel, of blueprints and stress calculations. I believed that for every effect there was a cause, a measurable, explainable origin. Ghosts, spirits, the supernatural, these were the stuff of campfire tales and late-night movies, amusing distractions for those who hadn't yet learned to see the world for what it was, a complex but ultimately solvable equation. That all changed a little over a year ago. A messy divorce had left me adrift, questioning the foundations of a life I thought I had meticulously planned. Seeking a drastic change, a way to silence the echoes of my failed marriage, I quit my job, sold my sterile suburban house, and bought a used pickup truck. My plan, if you could call it that, was to drive, to photograph the forgotten corners of America, the decaying relics of a bygone era. I was drawn to the romance of ruin, the quiet dignity of things left behind. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a journey to find some semblance of myself in the decaying monuments of others. My travels eventually led me to the unassuming stretch of Route 66 that cuts through northeastern Oklahoma, a place where the sky feels vast and the silence is broken only by the whisper of the wind through the tall prairie grass. It was here, in the small, almost forgotten town of Commerce, that I decided to stay for a while. The town itself was a living photograph, a collection of faded brick buildings and rusting signs that spoke of a more prosperous time. I rented a small, run-down house on the outskirts of town, a place with peeling paint and a porch that groaned under my weight. It was perfect. The emptiness of the house mirrored my own, and in its quiet solitude I found a strange sort of comfort. It was on the third night in that house that I first saw it. I was on the porch, nursing a lukewarm beer and watching the last vestiges of daylight bleed from the horizon. The air was still, thick with the scent of dust and distant rain. That's when a light appeared in the distance, a single amber orb hovering over a desolate gravel road that locals called the Devil's Promenade. At first, I dismissed it. Car headlights, I thought, refracted by the atmosphere, or maybe some local kids playing a prank. It was a logical explanation, the kind of answer my old self would have been satisfied with. But the light didn't behave like headlights. It bobbed and weaved, sometimes splitting into 2 or 3 smaller lights before merging back into one. It would hover for a moment, a silent, watchful eye in the darkness, and then dart across the landscape with an unnatural speed. It was strange, unsettling, but I clung to my skepticism like a life raft. There had to be a rational explanation. There always was. The next morning, I mentioned the light to the old man who ran the local diner, a place where the coffee was strong and the gossip was plentiful. His name was Samuel, and his face was a roadmap of wrinkles, each one a testament to a life lived under the Oklahoma sun. When I described what I had seen, a knowing look flickered in his eyes. "Ah," he said, wiping the counter with a damp cloth. "You've seen the Spooklight." He went on to tell me the local legends, the stories that had been passed down through generations. Some said the light was the ghost of 2 young Quapaw lovers who had leaped to their deaths in the nearby Spring River, their spirits forever searching for each other. Others claimed it was the lantern of an old miner, his wife and children taken by Indians, doomed to wander the road for eternity. The most gruesome tale was of a decapitated Osage chief, his spectral lantern held high as he searched for his missing head. I listened with a polite, detached amusement. The stories were fascinating, a glimpse into the local folklore, but I didn't believe a word of it. They were just that, stories, created to explain a phenomenon that was likely nothing more than an atmospheric anomaly or the distant lights of the highway. I was a man of science, a man of reason. I wasn't about to be swayed by a collection of ghost stories, no matter how compellingly they were told. But as the days turned into weeks, my certainty began to erode. I saw the light again and again. Each time it seemed a little closer, a little bolder. I started taking my camera with me on my nightly vigils, hoping to capture some definitive proof of its mundane origins. But the light was elusive, a will-o'-the-wisp that danced just beyond the reach of my lens. My photographs were always blurry, the light a mere smudge against the inky blackness of the night. My initial skepticism, the bedrock of my identity, was beginning to fracture. I found myself poring over old newspaper articles in the local library, searching for any information I could find about the spooklight. I read eyewitness accounts that stretched back over a century, long before the advent of automobiles. People described the light as a ball of fire, a glowing orb that could change color and size in an instant. Some even claimed to have felt a palpable heat as it passed by. The more I read, the more I realized that this was not some modern-day hoax. The spooklight was a part of the local history, a persistent, inexplicable presence that had baffled generations. I learned that the Army Corps of Engineers had investigated the light, their team of scientists and experts leaving with no conclusive explanation. They had ruled out swamp gas, phosphorescence, and even distant headlights. The light, it seemed, defied all logical explanation. It was a newspaper article from 1948 that finally shattered my carefully constructed wall of disbelief. It was a small, almost insignificant piece, buried in the back pages of the local paper. It told the story of a family, the Abernathys, who had lived in the very house I was now renting. The article was vague, but it hinted at a tragedy, a sudden and unfortunate end for the family of four. There was no mention of the spooklight, but a cold, heavy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach as I read the words. That night, the house felt different. The familiar creaks and groans of the old structure, once a source of comfort, now sounded like whispers in the darkness. I sat on the porch, my camera in my lap, a sense of dread coiling in my gut. The spooklight appeared as it always did, a single, baleful eye in the distance. But this time, it didn't stay on the Devil's Promenade. It moved, slowly at first, and then with a terrifying speed, directly towards my house. Panic seized me. I scrambled for the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I fumbled with the lock, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. As I finally managed to open the door, a wave of cold air washed over me, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The light was closer now, so close that I could see it wasn't a single orb, but a swirling mass of smaller lights, like a swarm of angry fireflies. And from within the light, I heard a sound, a faint ethereal whisper that seemed to call my name. I slammed the door shut, my back pressed against the cold wood, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispering grew louder, a chorus of disembodied voices that seemed to seep through the very walls of the house. I could hear my name, over and over again, a chilling, insistent chant. The doorknob began to rattle, slowly at first, and then with a violent, frantic energy. I was no longer a skeptic, no longer a man of reason. I was a terrified animal, trapped in a cage with a predator I couldn't see or understand. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and paranoid days. I kept the curtains drawn, the doors locked, but I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. The whispering was a constant presence, a low, menacing hum that vibrated in the back of my mind. I saw shadows darting in the corners of my vision, fleeting shapes that vanished the moment I turned to look. I was coming apart at the seams, my grip on reality slipping with each passing hour. My friend, Mark, a fellow engineer and a man whose logic and reason I had always admired, called to check on me. I tried to explain what was happening, my voice a torrent of panicked, disjointed words. I told him about the light, the whispers, the feeling of being hunted. He listened patiently, and then, with a gentle, patronizing tone that sent a fresh wave of despair through me, he suggested that I was overworked, stressed, that perhaps I should see a doctor. He didn't believe me. Of course he didn't. How could he? I sounded like a lunatic. His disbelief was the final nail in the coffin of my sanity. I was alone, truly and utterly alone, in a nightmare of my own making. The world I had known, the world of order and reason, had dissolved around me, leaving me adrift in a sea of inexplicable terror. Desperate for answers, I sought out Samuel, the old diner owner. I found him sitting on his porch, a pipe in his hand, his eyes fixed on the setting sun. I told him everything, the words tumbling out of me in a frantic, desperate rush. He listened without interruption, his expression a mixture of pity and a deep, weary sadness. When I was finished, he told me the full story of the Abernathy family. They had been a happy family, he said, a mother, a father, and 2 young children. But they had been plagued by the spooklight, which they believed to be a malevolent entity. They had become reclusive, their fear turning to paranoia. One night, the father, driven mad by the constant torment, had killed his family and then himself. The official report had called it a murder-suicide, a tragic but all too human event. But the townspeople knew the truth. They knew that it was the light that had driven him to it, the light that had whispered its poison into his ear until he had no choice but to obey. The story was a chilling echo of my own experience. I saw myself in the father, in his descent from reason to madness. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the light was not just a passive observer, it was a predator, a thing of ancient, malevolent intelligence, and it had chosen me as its next victim. That night I decided to fight back. Armed with a flashlight and a heavy iron tire iron, I drove out to the Devil's Promenade. I was no longer a photographer, no longer a grieving ex-husband. I was a man pushed to the brink, a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. I parked my truck and waited. The silence of the night was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. And then it appeared. The single amber eye watching me from the darkness. This time, I didn't run. I got out of the truck, the tire iron clutched in my hand, my knuckles white. "What do you want?" I screamed into the darkness, my voice raw with a mixture of fear and defiance. The light seemed to pulse in response, a slow, hypnotic rhythm. It began to move towards me, not with the frantic energy of before, but with a slow, deliberate purpose. The whispering started again, louder now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to claw at my mind. As the light drew closer, the air grew thick and heavy, the smell of ozone and decay filling my lungs. I could feel a strange, tingling sensation on my skin, as if I were standing in the presence of a powerful electrical charge. The light was now only a few feet away, a swirling vortex of energy that seemed to bend the very fabric of reality around it. I raised the tire iron, my arm shaking, and charged. I swung with all my might, a desperate, futile gesture against an enemy I couldn't comprehend. The tire iron passed through the light as if it were nothing more than smoke, a cold, numbing sensation shooting up my arm. The light enveloped me. I was suspended in a world of blinding, amber light, the whispering voices now a deafening roar in my ears. I saw things that my mind couldn't process, images of ancient cosmic horrors, of civilizations rising and falling, of stars being born and dying. I felt a presence, an ancient alien consciousness, and I knew, with a terrible, soul-crushing certainty, that I was nothing to it, less than an insect, a fleeting, insignificant spark in the vast, cold darkness of its existence. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I was lying on the gravel road, the taste of blood and dust in my mouth. The light was gone. The silence of the night had returned, but it was a different kind of silence now, a heavy, pregnant silence that seemed to hum with an unseen energy. I don't know how long I lay there, my mind a shattered mess of fragmented images and half-remembered horrors. Eventually, I managed to stumble back to my truck and drive away, leaving the Devil's Promenade and the town of Commerce behind me. I never went back. I sold my truck, my cameras, everything that reminded me of that time. I moved to a new city, got a new job, and tried to piece my life back together. But the scars remain. I still have nightmares, visions of swirling amber light and whispering voices. I can't stand the dark, the silence, the feeling of being alone. I am no longer a man of reason. I have seen what lies beyond the veil of our perceived reality, the ancient, unknowable things that watch us from the darkness. The world is not a solvable equation. It is a place of deep, terrifying mystery, and we are but fleeting shadows in a cosmic drama that we can never hope to understand. They say the Spooklight is just a legend, a ghost story told to frighten children. But I know the truth. I have looked into its eye, and it has looked into mine. And in that moment, I saw the terrible, beautiful, and utterly indifferent face of the void. And it is a sight that I will carry with me to my grave. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again, and some lights, once seen, can never be unseen. I am a living testament to that truth, a man forever marked by the unexplained ghost lights of Route 66.